drinking a beer. So no, wrong meeting, sorry. Bad joke. Anyways, pleasure to be here. I'm a Himalayan climber. I started climbing there in 1988 and have been on expedition there probably every year since then. In 1999, with 2 weeks' notice, I was invited to go to Mount Everest. And it was for the Mallory Urban Research Expedition, and it changed my life. I went from being a dirtbag to being a controversial person. So, yeah, it's what I am in England. And on that trip, I met Funuru, who was 17 at the time, and the team that I was working with Eric Simonson and IMG, were primarily from the village of Fort Say. And I realized that what we were able to do was on the backs of these guys. And subsequent to that, I was trekking in Nepal in 2002 with Jenny, and we were leading a guiding group and went out climbing after we were trekking, and everyone really enjoyed climbing. So the idea was to create a climbing training program for high altitude workers that focuses on the avocational aspect. So, but that we do it because we love to do it, not that it's a vocation. So there was that a little bit of a difference, and so that was the foundation. So there we go.
I'm Melissa Arnott, and I have been working as a professional guide for the last 10 years, and 7 of those years I've spent going to Everest every spring and the Everest region every fall, and it's become hugely defining in my life. My first trip there, I went as a guide on a commercial expedition, on a big commercial expedition, and I've gone in a lot of different roles over there on really small expeditions and just as an individual climber with a single climbing partner. And I think it's showed me, I'm very young, I'm 30 years old, and I've seen this industry that is the entire Everest machine change a lot over the last 7 years. And that's a very small amount of time, but it's kind of a big amount of time if you consider how long the commercial industry, Ellen just saying when you were there in '86, feeling like you were at the beginning of something, there was really nobody there, and that's very true. It's like 25 years in, 7 years is a long time in that. And every time I go and I come back, I continue to think there has to be a way to responsibly conduct ourselves here so that people can continue to experience this place in the ways that we've experienced it, that have changed our lives and motivated us to sit up here, invested in it. And I've sort of taken on this role in the last couple of years, deciding not to spectate and sit in the audience and saying, there's gotta be something we can do, but saying, what can I do? And trying to start doing those things. And so that's a huge part of what this is for me, is getting really collaborative input from people who know way more than I do. Like people.
All right. To paraphrase a quite famous organization, my name is Markus Hallgren. I'm not a climber, but I'm a professor in management and organizational theory. And I'm at the business school in Sweden, in the northern part of Sweden, which I've learned is about like 63rd latitude or something like that, so it's pretty far up. And what I do for a living is basically doing research on extreme environments, of which then kind of mountaineering is one of those environments. And what we do research on, more specifically, that's about decision making and organizing of expeditions, but also kind of walking into it now, kind of trying to ramp it up, looking into the kind of commodification and commercialization of mountaineering, going back to how it used to be, kind of even past 85 and 86 and all that stuff, but actually going back to when it started and see how things have evolved over time and how it have developed into what we can see today. And what can I say? I'm extremely honored to sit here and extremely humbled. Thank you.
I'm John Harlin, and way back in 1978, I got my degree in environmental biology and thought I was going to go on and become a scientist, get my PhD and all that, but I needed to get climbing out of my system, so I wanted to take 2 years off and ended up becoming a mountain guide up here in Rocky Mountain National Park, and then writing a series of guidebooks to climbing in North America. and then working for Backpacker magazine for a long time and editing another magazine called Summit, and then the American Alpine Journal for a decade, and I've always wanted to get back to those environmental roots and conservation and science, and so finally I left that and started working for the Mountain Institute a bit over a year ago, and specifically on a project called USAID-funded project, the High Mountains Adaptation Partnership, studying glacial lakes and helping local communities with adaptation plans for action for climate change in Cordillera Blanca and Kumbu. And as part of that, I started researching whether it made sense to put together an Everest Alliance to solve some of the problems that were making the news, and that Everest was having a lot of issues, environmental and social, and so I managed to get a small grant from USAID to do some research on that and some workshops, and made my first trip. I've been up to climbing in Tibet before, but never been to Nepal in all these years, and so spent the month of May in Nepal interviewing a lot of people and talking with people about whether it makes sense to start such an organization or all that. So that's how I've learned about the Everest region, and then the idea is big part of the idea was, if it made sense, if we could find a productive way to do this, to solve problems communally in the Everest region, we could take that well-known region and then apply those lessons learned to other mountains around the world. So I don't exactly know where we're going to go with that yet. We're still a very active process, and then I'm going to start working in a month for the Les American School in Switzerland, introducing a science and youth development program there.
Hi, I'm Dawa Steven Sherpa. I'm from Nepal. My father is Sherpa. My mother's from Belgium. I was born in Nepal. I grew up there. I represent the third generation. My grandfather, my father, myself, we've all worked in mountain tourism. In fact, my grandfather was the lead contractor for the porters of the 1963 American expedition. In fact, my father also accompanied part of the expedition up to Jumbesi. I lead expeditions on Everest, the main commercial expedition that we organize as Asian Trekking, which is the family company. I also currently am a board member of the Expedition Operators Association, and in particular, myself and Funuru's brother Am Jangbu, we are the coordinators for the rope fixing on Mount Everest. I was until February on the board of the Nepal Mountaineering Association, and I was looking after the Environment Protection Committee. And I will also be talking about some of the other projects which I'm doing through an organization that myself and some friends set up called the Himalayan Climate Initiative, which is again to talk about climate change and also environmental protection. So that's me.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike. Thank you, Roger, for the nice introduction. And I gotta go there. Everybody calls me Gator. If you want to just call me Gator, they can't pronounce my last name. You're welcome to outside of this forum and whenever you see me at the bar. And I'm thrilled to be here. I will admit I haven't even been to Asia, so I should give that disqualifier right away. But what I have done is I've worked a lot in national parks at Olympic and Mount Rainier and Denali. And also I actually spent some time in the Washington, D.C. office. I survived, and I got onto Yosemite. And so it's flattering to still participate in mountaineering business, because day to day my life isn't really mountaineering anymore after I left Mount Rainier, and I will admit freely that I missed that a little bit. But what I found when I came to Yosemite, and what I think is apparent here with this discussion, in the last couple days in the conference, and maybe actually before I jump in for one quick second, I got to do a quick shout out to a couple people. Both Ellen and Roger actually deserve a tremendous round of applause for pulling this together. And when I first got to Yosemite, I met a guy named Ken Yeager, and if you get to know him, he's a fantastic human being. And Ken introduced me to Tom Frost, who actually also is an amazing man. And Tom went right to the heart of the problem, the conflict at times, what is discussed between Yosemite climbing and the Park Service and whatnot. And he basically said his statement was that climbers are leaders and they're problem solvers, they think creatively, they solve issues, they deal with challenges that are complicated that maybe bureaucrats don't do so well at. And frankly, I completely agreed with him, but of course I'm the bureaucrat now, so I have to wear the bureaucrat hat. And we had a long talk, and frankly, I don't think he's always impressed with the Yosemite National Park. And it's something that, for me personally, coming from the climbing background in the Northwest and Olympic in the Seattle region and the mountaineering, that we wanted to really improve. And it's something that I think at Yosemite we strive for. And anyway, one of my hats that I wear as the chief of staff of the park is I do chair our International Affairs Committee. And we have relationships all over the globe. And it sounds arrogant, but it's real, in that what happens at Yosemite has impact elsewhere, and it really matters. And people look to it for what's going on to measure themselves, either greater or lesser than. And so with Yosemite, when we discuss fire management issues or visitor use issues or wild scenic river plans or design of facilities and maintaining facilities for many years to come, it's a key part of conservation in America, and it reflects around the globe. And we believe strongly at Yosemite that it's actually our job to maybe step up and provide more support and leadership in the international community and as far as preservation and conservation and really participate in that world. More broadly than just our unique problems, which is very easy to always get drawn into our unique problems. And I think Ellen was correct in saying that tonight we don't want to necessarily dwell exclusively on Everest, but I'm not going to kid myself. I think we're going to talk a lot about Everest tonight because I think, well, I know Mount Everest is Yosemite. It's kind of the same thing. When something happens, we joke, when someone trips their ankle in Yosemite, they trip and they sprain their ankle, it actually ends up in the paper, which is absurd. But and so in Mount Everest, anytime something happens, it's greatly amplified, and it's seen as a measure of ourselves and exploration and adventure, and clearly it's why we're drawn to the sport. But it also is important for us to remember that these decisions and these actions, they're the stories of our community, and they're the stories that we tell as we pass on. And so when we hear about the conflicts or the successes, they become our lore. And so with this summit, Roger and Ellen, thank you for bringing a broader discussion about how we as climbers and we as managers and people who steward our lands and work in the commercial industry can do our best to champion this for the world. Because as Tom Frost would tell you, we're leaders, and he would really put the badge on all of you, you're here, and he would put it on you that you need to lead and you need to participate and you need to have a voice in these discussions, and it's our moral imperative to participate in those discussions. So again, I'm flattered I haven't been to Everest. It's almost, I have to admit I had to do a lot of background research to understand the complexity of the issues, because they're very different than what we deal as a park manager in the National Park Service here. And obviously on April 18, we had this terrible tragedy with 16 Sherpa, and I just can't go without saying it, losing their lives, and basically in support of something that we all fundamentally identify ourselves with. And so how do we move from that experience and move forward, because we all have to, we're all going to, and how do we establish ourselves as leader in conservation and resources management and in recreation services and commercial services, and in dealing with the broader issues like Dawa was discussing of climate change, which is going to so dramatically affect us a lot in the glaciers we join. I don't need to show too much of that. So maybe I could begin with a question. Actually, I'm going to set a couple more ground rules. One, we are welcoming questions from the audience. If you have a question, I just invite you to maybe stand your hand up. It's going to be a bit informal. We've got obviously 6 people up here discussing things, so it could bounce around, and we didn't want to pass around a mic. So I guess I just wanted to hear from the panelists, and we're going to have to just dive in at some point. In Dawa, I got to admit that you're standing next to me, and you did identify yourself as the youngest and best looking. That is maybe the first pray here. But you know, I guess there's the issue of running a commercial guiding business, but what I was struck by with the accident is that there's so much of our ideas about the climbing and the achievement of personal climbing, and people identify a lot of value in that, but that's a very different animal than dealing with the commercial business world. And I guess from your perspective in Nepal, what do you see as some of the challenges for that government in managing basically a very important identity for the world? I mean, it's seen, and in Yosemite, just to give you a break for 1 second, there's so many people in Yosemite that love Nepal. It was very easy to find these connections, and so it means a lot to the world, and Everest does as far as commercial tourism. And so how do we move that puck forward or down the court to identify what commercialism means, how it impacts the country? What do you see as its initial problems or the biggest obstacles for us right now?
Well, there's for us a lot. I think the biggest problem that we have currently is that there's nothing being done to manage the mountain, and that's the hard fact of it, which is that the government and the bureaucrats inside the government, it keeps changing every 6 months or so, and so there is no vision and there is no consistency in any thinking in any policies, and so those of us who are in the industry are constantly trying to bring changes in the policy, which has been stuck since 2033, Nepali year 2033, which is nearly 40 years now, and so that's, I think, one of the biggest problems. We have a system, we're following rules and a way of thinking that was suitable 40 years ago perhaps, but it's not anymore. And that needs to come to the modern age, I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now for us who are in the industry.
Melissa, you've been on the ground recently, has been well publicized. From your perspective, how does what Dawa say go, and how does that meet on the glacier from where you're sitting? And Conrad, I'm going to tag you next for the follow-ups, a little bit more of this, but where is that?
Yeah, I think it's really been very fascinating because I've had these really complicated and intelligent discussions with people on the ground in Nepal who are trying to help make this place better, including Dawa, trying to really look forward to the future. How do we implement a better place, including, Conrad and Jenny working so hard to make that happen. And there's so much that we can identify as what we need to do, but you kind of back up a few steps and you look at, just take mountaineering out of the equation just for one moment, and you just look at Nepal as a country and take any other issue within the country and just follow it backwards for a few years and see the progress and the challenges that any other issue that has been regulated by the Nepal government has been managed. And you'll quickly identify some of the same problems that we're very much facing right now on a very public stage. So I think, exactly what Dawa was saying, there's been no change, there's been no real heavy-handed regulation in mountaineering, but not really. The country's been an incredible political transition, and we have to start by appreciating that fact, because everything is going to come out of that first, and then we can start getting into the little nuances of our world and what so imminently affects all of us.
Okay, Conrad, honestly, the KCC's been impactful. It affects us in the Park Service. You're frankly making change happen as an outsider and on Nepali in the country, so what's your, just kind of curious.
Everest is, it's an attainable goal that is going to draw a lot of people that are successful. They want something, they want a trophy they can put on their wall. And it's still unique. I mean, there's probably 3,000 people, maybe 6,000 ascents that have climbed Everest. So it's a unique thing for people to go to. And therefore, there's a huge demand. And if we look back at market economy, that's what's going on. And so both the Chinese government, which administers Tibet, and the Nepali government, which administers the south side, they will basically charge what the market can bear, and it's an expensive endeavor. So climbing, because of that, it changed from when I was a young man. When Doug Scott climbed the Southwest Face, I would have walked across the street on my knees in busy traffic to shake his hand. And now it's like, I go to Yosemite, you're like, dude, you've climbed Everest, you're not worthy anymore. So it's like this change around where it's become far more commercial. But at the base of the challenge that the next decade, the next 2 decades, is that there needs to be a climbing management plan for Mount Everest. There's, as the Whitaker, Professor Whitaker, I'll call him, he was a great presentation this afternoon, identified carrying capacities and what the mountain, all these different concepts, and we need to apply that to Nepal. And Denali's done a great job with their climbing management plan. The season there runs from April to July. It's 2,000 meters lower. You carry your own gear. You fly in with a fixed wing aircraft, but many things are similar. You're climbing on a glaciated peak. It's one of the 7 summits. How we deal with humans and humans' waste is all very similar. So until we get to that point where a carrying capacity can be identified and there's a way to distribute permits, whether it's by price, by experience, by lottery, or some mix between all of those 3, we're going to continue to see this conflict between climbers who are on the mountain and an increasing amount of people on a very, very narrow weather window and a very narrow route to climb on, and that is sort of the source of the conflict.
I appreciate it. I was happy to see, is Hano here today? Is he right now? Okay, great, yeah. He had a great slide about management, and I just thought it was so appropriate the way he described the different management and how it would impact later, tight management versus, and I guess, John and Marcus, I mean, in your experiences, with ecotourism or tourism or commercialism of a peak, and clearly it's Everest is driven by a different parameter than the other 8,000 meter peaks, right? Like you just aren't technological pressure on them. I mean, what do you see, John? I mean, from your perspective, and I know you've traveled all over the globe and climbed. Like, how can we use Everest as, or not use Everest as anything, but really do something at Everest that impacts how we do climbing and climbing management, and particularly commercial services in this case, and local economies.
Well, it's so interesting. Everest rises above this whole populated valley, the Khumbu, a set of valleys. And so there's these issues that are specifically Everest-oriented, and then there's all these other complex of issues that are going on in the Khumbu. And obviously, a big part of why the Khumbu has been placed on the map so famously is because it has Everest, and that has the draw. And it just probably always will. I mean, at the school in Switzerland, I was there for a while this spring, and there was these kids I was talking with, and one of them he was from Russia, and he was saying, I'm going to climb Everest. He just wanted to climb Everest. He had no interest in climbing at all, no background in climbing, but Everest is something he had to do because it's the highest in the world, and he's never not going to be the highest in the world. And so that's both a great plus for the Everest region and a great challenge at the same time. And the Khumbu needs to take advantage of that in the best way they can. There's so much now reaction, like Conrad was saying, that now people in Yosemite say you're not worthy anymore because you climbed Everest. So that's the opposite ends of the spectrum. It depends on how sophisticated a climber you are generally. But like when I was talking about the Everest Alliance with some heads of large mountaineering clubs in Europe this spring, we had one of the major clubs there who said, we won't get involved in the Everest Khumbu region at all. That's just an example of everything done badly. It was the worst example of tourism, of mountain tourism. And our goal, if we had the Everest Alliance or in founding it, would be to sort of turn that around and say, okay, well, whatever those challenges are, they're being addressed and they're being solved. And when I actually went there, I saw things being addressed and solved much better than I had any expectations of. And so I think there's all these different perceptions that are happening, but there's tremendous both opportunity for them and I'd like to think responsibility if they think about the influence of their actions there and how it can be how it's viewed throughout the world, like it is in Yosemite. But I don't think most of the people there are thinking that way. That's us as outsiders thinking of it that way. But we can potentially use that to help things there. They can get more funding from companies like Coca-Cola, for example, that is helping to fund some efforts of Dawa's, because Everest is there as this icon that they can use to attach themselves to. And so it really needs to be taken advantage of. But from a climbing perspective, I mean, I personally just don't view the standard route up as something that I would look to as a climbing experience. Most people who are doing it aren't climbers. But there's something like 14 routes on the mountain, and there's only 2 that really get climbed now at all. And so when people put down Everest and say, oh, you can't get an adventure on Everest, that's just a joke. Well, climb something else, you know? You don't have to do those routes. And I think that's the case in so many of these access issues that we've seen. I love these corridors. Keep those corridors going. Everybody who wants to crowd onto the corridor, that's great, and leaves the rest of the mountain for the rest of us.
Not only that, the other routes are actually, the permits for those routes are much cheaper than the 10,000 you pay for the normal route. So it's actually, the government of Nepal has actually made that concession to encourage people to go on those routes, yet people still go on the normal route and still complain that, you know, it's a highway.
But the truth of that is, I think that Everest, regardless of the standard route being, you know, void of adventure for a climber of sophistication, it still holds enough adventure that I know a lot of climbers who you would consider we would all consider quite sophisticated of climbers, and they said, I want to climb the normal route to get that experience of that altitude before I endeavor down these other challenges where the risk level is much higher, I'm risking my life, going there I want to know that I can function in that way, and so that's one aspect of adventure. And then there's the commercial aspect where we enable people to have adventures that they couldn't otherwise have, and it should be done responsibly. And so I think this attitude, we've all felt it at different points on different climbs. Everybody who's ever climbed anything has been like, oh, thank God I'm not climbing that 5.5 6-pitch route that like 27 people are on. You're psyched that they're on it. But if it was just constantly causing problems and there was, you know, it was causing human waste issues and environmental issues and human death issues, you would say, maybe, you know, I don't want to just climb right next to that and ignore it. Could we do this better? And I think that's the position that we sort of all are entangled in, right, is to look at it a little bit more responsibly and say, you know, not just, yeah, go for it, be in that corridor and stay very busy in there, but we want to conduct safe and responsible adventure within that corridor and encourage people that are capable of climbing those other routes, not just send people on those other routes. I think it's a very complicated issue.
And as we've been talking about here, educate them and make them better environmental stewards. And
everybody to come responsibly with eyes open. I mean, if I could have a dream of Everest, it would be that, you know, just as many people could come and the region could support it if everybody was actually engaged in what they were actually doing. They looked at how their human being in that region was impacting everybody else's human lives and the life of the environment. Huge.
As an academic, I always have a perspective. On one hand, on the other hand. No, but I mean, from the countries, from the comments so far, I mean, we've been talking about how the country needs to kind of push changes and so on, and kind of develop this carrying capacity, for example. It might be that I'm kind of from northern part of Sweden, and we are extremely known for being cynical and kind of pessimistic and so on. So I don't think anything will happen in Nepal within the kind of time frame that we will need to see these changes. And I think that causes problems. But it's pretty simple as well, because it comes down to economic considerations. I mean, as long as people come pouring in, I mean, then there's no need for the change, because it's generating money. And unfortunately, money runs a lot of our society. So that would be a problem. My suggestion then is to, instead of looking to the government to kind of come with solutions, so to say, I think the solutions has to come from companies, from organizations, and not only address issues that we find in Nepal, because this is an international thing. So I think the solutions should come from organizations and from companies, but kind of have some kind of international independent body that's not attached and dependent on private companies or governments or something like that. In terms of my research, I come out of kind of project research. So I've been studying diesel power plants and stuff like that. I've written a bunch of papers about it and was extremely bored, and that's why I was interested in expeditions. No, but I think one thing that could be learned from that is that there's a number of certification bodies for project managers. Basically, these bodies kind of certify people saying, okay, that's a good project manager. And over the years, the last 10 years, I mean, the members of these certification bodies have just skyrocketed, basically. And the reason why it has skyrocketed is that the clients are asking the companies to have certified project managers because they want to know that the projects are actually successful, or that the company has the knowledge they think is required in order to have a successful project, a safe project. I think something like that could also benefit the kind of climbing community. I mean, some kind of certification body is saying that, well, this is kind of a well-organized expedition, or these have the kind of basic requirements in order to run an expedition. And these ones, they don't have the certification. Of course, you can go with them, that's fine, but at least you should know that these ones we kind of think of as having the kind of right experience or whatever one measures. So, I mean, that's my take on it. I'm cynical about the governmental solution. It has to be a part of it, but it's not going to be the solution. But it has to come from organizations and from kind of the grassroots. So I think this is a good first step.
Both Conrad and Dawa, I'm kind of curious, just from Nepal, is it really, I mean, I kind of keep hearing this and I can't help, is it really, do you really just give up on government management though, with some sort of larger authority, or do you repurpose and try it? I mean, again, I admit I haven't been to Nepal, but it seems as though that might be a key step. Maybe Dawa, so I think with Conrad, I'd be curious from your perspective also what you think about Nepal in general and else businesses that you've got some of these.
You don't give up on the government. You keep knocking on that door. Even if nobody opens, you keep knocking, and that's what we've been doing. My dad's the president of NMA, of the Mountaineering Association, and that's what he's doing now. And almost never the door is open, but sometimes just a little crack opens and something, small change happens, and we're happy with that. Little at a time, you know. But that's the only way we know. But we don't rely on the government. We have to rely on ourselves if we want to improve things. But it doesn't mean that we stop knocking. And regardless, you have to keep trying.
Will the government actually get in the way? Is it sometimes better not
So
to
there I was going to take
involve
the next
them?
question to Conrad with what he's doing, but thank you, John. That's just like, will the government get away if the climbers take the leadership, and the companies who seem to be most benefiting from this take the leadership in that? And what is, and frankly, I'd love to hear what you guys think what that leadership looks like, as you know best. Maybe that's the heart of the question here.
Well, July 2001 was momentous for Nepal. We know September 2001 was 9/11, but July 2001 was when King Birenda was assassinated by his son. So it was regicide, fratricide, matricide, patricide, all wrapped into one. And subsequent to that, the state of Nepal government has been in turmoil, and double-digit inflation, the Maoist insurgency, more people coming from the rural areas into the city, intimidation. So it's been a very difficult political climate to work within. And where we look at sort of how we operate within the United States with public agencies that govern the land, it was quite different. So there might be an appointed minister that would then be in charge of some aspect of the country that was appointed, but then that minister might be on the take or sort of be working illegally. And so that really created a difficult groundwork to operate and to move things forward, but it also created a vacuum in which allowed anyone can show up to Everest Base Camp and say, I'm guiding Everest. And if I wanted to go out and guide Denali, and I did it illegally, Roger would know. He'd be like, Conrad, this guy looks like a client. When I showed up with my son, it was obviously I was taking my son up there, but when it was a different, that sort of regulation, so it sort of opened it up to a free-flowing thing. And put into that mix commercial operators, a lot of them are Western outfits, the Ministry of Civil Aviation and Tourism, which issues the permits for the peak, that collects the royalties for it, the Ministry of Soil Conservation and Forestry, which is the national park of Sagarmatha National Park, the Sagarmatha Pollution Control Committee, the tour operators within Nepal. So you have 5 or 6 different entities looking to influence things as they see best. And there's really no one deciding person or entity that can say, this is the way we need to go forward with it. And in that, I think in that sort of that free form areas where some of the challenges have come in. A good example of this is helicopter flights. I mean, they're unregulated. Helicopter fixed wing travel on Denali is very regulated, and where helicopters can go and how they can fly. They keep tabs on it, but there'll be maybe 30 flights a morning on a busy day, and people flying up to land at base camp, have a cup of tea to say I made it, and then fly back out, or clients flying down to Kathmandu to recuperate with some richer oxygen and have a couple of yak steaks and then fly back up and make it to the summit. Is this sort of, instead of walking down to breathe thicker air, flying out with a helicopter. And a lot of these points on Everest is we're going to have to accept the fact that we need to regulate it if we're going to preserve the mountain, because it's a very harsh environment. It's also a very delicate environment. And if we want to have that experience for the people that are coming to climb there, but moreover that the people that are part of this mountain community, the Nepali people, that this is their asset. And so much like the lecture we had on Bolivia, and sort of we are Bolivians and this is what we want, this is La Paz, this is our mountains, things like that, that rightfully, in my view, that the Sherpas should be guiding Everest, they do the work, they do all this, and that this should be an experience that when people come to climb Everest, they're working with Nepali people.
Clap there. Melissa, any?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there are so many interested parties that are, and I think it gets vilified in a sort of strange way that's not necessarily justified when you say, oh, look at all this money that people are paying for commercial expeditions or of all varieties. It's kind of a big number, but there are so many interested parties that are taking some of that money, including the government and the Ministry of Tourism and the local operators and the foreign operators and the Pollution Control Committee, and there's a lot of different directions that it's going. And I think, first and foremost, again, back to what I said before, conducting ourselves responsibly so that this is something that exists for a very long time for a lot of people. We don't use it all up. And that doesn't necessarily mean, that people aren't making a sustainable living doing it. I don't think there's anything wrong with people being invested in wanting to make a living there, whether that is the Sherpa people, which absolutely have a right to make a living there and a sustainable living there, or operators that are bearing the burden of the liability of bringing Western clients into that atmosphere.
John, I would like to not always just talk about Everest. I think it's easy to go back to it for the variety of reasons, but in your experience, I mean, what again, Hano, I gotta just tell you, I love that slide because to me so encapsulated what I kind of was seeing going on in Everest. There's clearly kind of a lack of, it seems, leadership. That just is, and as someone who's never been there and I just have to read, it just seems as though it is kind of almost the ultimate climbing environment where, yeah, make it happen, make it so. And, but is that what we want? And is that really, I mean, how is that impacting? Clearly, the communities that are outside are benefited from it right outside the, Everest Base Camp and whatnot, but that has a tremendous impact on their livelihoods, as we just saw with the recent accident. So I don't even know how to encapsulate the question, but how do we move leadership into this world? Because the media, one year I joked, I was like, God, if I could just get Climbing Rock and Ice magazine to just not talk about Yosemite for 1 year, like there's so many great climbing areas, and they keep telling you about Serenity Crack and Moody Dick and Windows and whatnot, and coming up the fastest, and like, could they just stop for 1 year talking about Yosemite, just see what the impact is? But we're never gonna get that break, and Everest is never gonna get that break. And I'm not going to Everest, and I'm just gonna make a risky statement in saying that I suspect Everest will be climbed successfully next year, and that people are going to be on it doing a lot of business. And so, is it going to change? Is it going to?
I think I'd like to say something that I think John was mentioning earlier. I don't know who was mentioning, but you know that things will. I think maybe Marcus said that it won't change within the time period that the change needs to happen. Nepal is a very, very complicated country. It's not as straightforward as, you know, you follow a trend on a graph. You know, for example, for a long time, Kathmandu has had very, very congested roads. I'm just giving an example here. And it's simply because, you know, building codes aren't being followed and everybody's encroaching on the public land, and so the roads are all narrow. And along came a couple of years ago a prime minister, regardless of his political affiliation. He made a bold decision, and he said anybody who is actually encroaching public land, we're going to destroy bulldoze their houses, because they know them not to do it, and we're going to expand all the roads. And now if you come to Kathmandu, if you've been there a couple of years ago, and if you're there now, you'll notice a huge change in how the streets of Kathmandu. So what I'm trying to say here is that in Nepal, things go very, very, very slowly, and suddenly something happens, and then it all flips, you know, and everything changes again. So it may not be a trend of change, but something can happen very quickly. And with this, in this regard, I think the problems that we're having, this leadership issue you're talking about, it's when the government is weak that the bureaucracy is strongest, I feel. And what I mean by that is when you don't have strong political leaders, the bureaucracy is going to govern. And the bureaucracy is always going to look for a way to maintain the status quo, because that's the safest option. You know, they are not elected, they're there to hold on to their jobs until they're retired. I'm sorry, I'm not, that's what I feel anyways. And so, the thing is,
I'll give you a Mitt Romney button. Really. I'm sorry. I'm a government employee.
But in Nepal's context anyways, and so, yes, the government is going to keep on wanting to follow the same rules because they know that's the safest option. The moment you start changing things around, there are going to be people who are going to be asking questions, and the bureaucrats won't be able to answer these questions. And so if at some point we could have a leader that makes bold decisions inside the tourism industry, then these changes could happen not in a matter of a year, it could happen in a matter of a week. I mean, it could be very, very quick, but we need that, that's it. We just don't have that person at this time who has that vision and who has that courage.
Yeah. I want to appreciate some comments that Jenny had said to me earlier about really pressing the climbing piece. So how can our community participate in doing that? And through the businesses, Marcus, please.
Well, it's kind of related to what I thought from what we've been talking about, and I think this conference is kind of a ironic bullseye in a sense. I mean, we are talking about how we would like to change stuff, what is happening in Nepal and so on, and how the government should be responsible of taking initiatives and so on. We're sitting in US doing this, kind of, they are there. I mean, it's actually them that's going to do it. I mean, if we want to change, I mean, then we should start with them and what they want to accomplish, how they want to accomplish it. Because as long as we as outsiders just say, well, all right, we think it should be managed like this. I mean, we're not listening.
But they are doing, I was surprised to learn just how quickly the capacity is increasing inside the country. And at the Nepal Mountaineering Association, I'm sure under Dawa's father's leadership, it's going to be making some huge improvements. And because people were telling me that in its 36 years of history, the Nepal Mountaineering Association has never actually accomplished anything. But I think that's going to change. And so there's people coming up. There's, I met somebody at this Italian research station called the Pyramid that there's this young guy, just this bright, he looks like a Lenin with glasses, and he's just really bright and energetic and very enthusiastic, and in charge of all these school committees and water project committees and everything. And he's leading with 15 or so other people, the first working group, this Kumbu planning process, the Kumbu master plan, they're calling it. And so he showed me a PowerPoint presentation that showed Kumjung the way it is now, and then if the growth of the houses continues the way it has been, it showed all the vacant land filled with houses. And so they're trying to introduce a master planning program for that, introducing more schools and trying to retain more kids, because a lot of people are saying that in 10, 20 years there won't be any Sherpas living in Kumbu anymore. They're all going to be in Kathmandu or abroad. They'll own the land, they'll be leasing the property to people from below who've come up to run it. So there's just all these dynamics going on, and one of the things that happens annually is this Sagamartha Tourism Commission. Is that what it's called? Sagamartha Tourism? It's an annual meeting, takes place in Namche, and I've seen the proceedings from this meeting, and they discuss all these issues. But the problem, as I see it anyway, is that they discuss it once a year at this, and then they don't talk to each other in between, except in little groups. And I think one of the things that's really missing is there's not enough talking to each other. There's not enough ongoing forum of dialogue, so that there'll be people starting one thing here and other people doing other things here, and it's a pretty small community, and they all are related to each other, but they might not know what each other's projects are. And so there needs to be a way of facilitating more communication, and there's so much that's happening now. The leadership, the Sagamartha Pollution Control Committee, they are the ones, the icefall doctors who put in the fixed ladders and the Kumbu icefall. Well, but really their job is garbage management, and throughout the Kumbu, and they have these, there's hardly any litter on the trails because now they have these collection depots all over the place that the SPCC has put in, but they fund themselves entirely from putting in fixed ladders because the government doesn't give them any money. All the trickers fees that are collected, very small percentage of that comes back to the area. The climber fees, very little of that comes back to the area. But in any case, it's very complex, but there is a lot of capacity that's already developing in place. And I think it's going to just keep getting better. There's ways that I think from the outside we can help facilitate that. And teaching people at the Kumbu Climbing School, there's outside guides coming in to help with that, but there's more and more capacity to self-train within it too. I think it's all in the transition.
I'd like to just pose a devil's advocate sort of question. A lot of people say more tourists means that the place is going to get dirtier, okay, as a general rule. But as John just told you, the SPCC, which is keeping the national park pretty much spotless, not completely, but they're doing a great job. And their only source of funding is from the climbers, the commercial climbers who are paying a fee for the ropes to be fixed on Everest in the icefall. Now, actually, the opposite would be true in our case. If there were less climbers, there would be less money to keep the national park clean. So we have a very, very symbiotic relationship with tourists coming to the area. I'm just saying, what do you think about that?
I think that that's all over the globe, though, and I would just share with you that's Mount Rainier, and that's the Alley, and that's Yosemite too. We get a slice of the money, basically, and I won't even pretend to understand Nepali budget because I sometimes can't understand the Park Service budget, but the money moves into shells and then it moves around, and so many things happen, right? Your money, you pay this amount of money. I paid $50, but where'd my $50 really go? Well, it may have been a little of the road, a little bit of the visitor center that you walked into in the restroom, and it doesn't all go to specifically that. But just one quick comment on that. Speaking of the icefall, it does seem that there's a significant amount of money raised though, with fees, permit fees, and with icefall fees and whatnot, so. And I don't know if there's a clear understanding where that money really goes. I have to admit, I didn't understand that. The fact that it is really keeping it clean is very important, but clearly, when the icefall has issues going on, it creates this global response. With media, like that incident obviously was huge, and we're not going to forget it, and it's going to impact us for years.
Actually, if I could tell you about the permit just quickly. So currently, it'll change from next year, but currently it's $10,000 per person, which is the royalty fee that goes to the government of Nepal, which goes to the Ministry of Tourism, which then actually goes into the coffers of the Ministry of Finance. So actually, there's a hierarchy of ministries as well. So the Ministry of Tourism is lower down than the Ministry of Finance. So actually, the Ministry of Tourism cannot force things on the Ministry of Finance unless there is a specific rule by the government of Nepal, by the Parliament, in which case, which has happened now, which is 30% of the money, the $10,000, is supposed to go back to the area where the mountain is. So if it's Manaslu area, 30% of that fee has to go to the Manaslu area. If it's Everest, 30% has to go to the Everest area. But again, that system is also kind of convoluted because it goes to the DDC, which is the District Development Committee. But the district has a load of VDCs, so this is Village Development Committee. Now the Everest region falls only under 3 VDCs, whereas there are numerous other ones in the district. And so to get access to the funds in the DDC, you have to go through the VDC. So VDC, DDC, Ministry of Finance. So it's a very, very long process to get anything done, to get any access to that money. But the money is there.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah. Let me just, I won't bore you with the budget discussion on their federal government. It would be stunning. It's not that different, surprisingly. Sounds kind of the same. I did see a couple questions, but I just have a feeling, too, that some of our panel wants to chat. Jim?
We talked about some of the difficulties of getting change from the top down. Sometimes change happens from the bottom up. So my question would be, how can we as visitors to Nepal support the guys, the operators, the Nepali people? What should we be doing to help you institute the change that needs to happen over the long term?
Can I start? I'm going to start with Conrad maybe on that for a second, because I know that you've got things to answer for.
Well, if you're a tourist there, and specifically if you're going to climb Everest, it would be like make sure that the people that you work with are treated fairly, that you're following the regulations, and you're insuring them to the right amount, and that they have proper equipment, which is part of your obligation to them with the stipend that you give them for their gear, and that they have proper training. And the more training the more that you as a tourist demand proper training, the more that's going to create a demand for training. And whether they get it through the NMA with Manang or through the KCC, or they get it through the Royal Walling program that the French Alpine Club runs, any one of these entities is a great way to give them that foundation. So as consumers, we can choose, just as we say, I would prefer organic corn to GMO corn, you can make that choice with your pocketbook.
But can I also say just quickly, make sure that the staff that are going on your trek have insurance, because everybody wants to save a penny. And so when you're booking online, you'll see one company is cheaper than the other. But you got to ask, where are they actually cutting corners? And insurance is one of the first things, because as long as everything goes fine, you'll never know. But when the shit hits the fan, that's when you realize that, okay, these guys aren't insured. And then all that, first of all, that's not good for the staff, because they don't get the medical treatment or the evacuation that they deserve. But secondly, you're going to be stuck with a tremendously big bill. So those are the sort of things that you also need to watch out for. Just adding on to it.
Yeah, in 2012 there was an accident. A Sherpa was hit by an ice fall. He broke his arm. We were there at base camp. We were responding to it, and we went over to his outfitter and we said, "Hey, there's a helicopter rescue," and they were like, "Oh, we don't have insurance." So Dawa, Dave Hahn, and I said, "Well, we're going to cover the fees on this insurance." The guy realized that he didn't have insurance, so he said, "Okay, if this gets out there, my business is going to tank." So he ended up covering that helicopter rescue fee. If you're following the letter of the law, everyone that's working on the mountain will be insured.
Just kind of back to what Dawa had said originally in the sort of last comment, that it just plays into exactly what Conrad and Dawa are saying now. I think one thing that we can all do, us as people who are invested in the Everest region in various ways, and then all of the potential users, is encourage transparency first of all, and best practices. And I think training of staff, of all your staff, so your local staff and your international staff and whomever you're going to interact with, and requiring a very high level of training is super important. Best practices, we've seen it continuously work in our national parks here. I mean, Rainier is a great example of that. Denali is a great example of that. Setting a standard that everybody adheres to. And in Nepal, it's a little bit different. What you're saying, Dow, like it can change overnight. Houses are gone overnight because they were built on the street and that was improper. Everybody knew that. It's kind of similar, you see it on Everest. It's a funny thing because it's like garbage is a really good example. You know, where it was kind of okay just to like throw your garbage off on the side of the trail until it wasn't. And then somebody had to say, that's not okay and we're not doing that and you will not see us doing that. And it became widely accepted as best practice and now it's shamed. And so I think we have a lot of power as the sort of voice and the current users to actually implement change sort of ground up. And it does require those questions. It does require saying, I'm not just looking at a dollar sign. And in 2012, I went around base camp and chatted with some different expeditions and just commercial customers about why they chose the outfitter they had chosen. And one group who were climbing with an outfitter that hadn't provided very well for their staff. They were very understaffed ratio-wise. They were underinsured and just sort of managed not at a best practice level. And the clients, who were American clients, had found this outfitter and they said, we've been around base camp. We know we're paying less, and basically the only difference is the quality of the food. And I said, you do realize that this one person, this one human being who's your guide is responsible for 7 of your lives on summit day. You're putting that burden on him and he has no insurance. You do realize that. And he's making 1/3 of what those people who are eating good food are making. So it's on us to actually be responsible again, and that's where I say, don't just look and say, gosh, that's a mess. Just invest a little bit, and everybody can do it, whether you're just gonna visit Kathmandu or trek or climb or whatever, is sort of starting to invest ourselves. And I do wanna support this industry. If I'm going to go there, I want to go there responsibly. Sorry, that's a lot.
Can you please? Thanks.
Yeah.
Phil Powers, everyone, in case you didn't know.
I think that's a great thought, that the consumer can be an advocate for change. But my guess is that the consumer is going to continue to get the best deal. Conrad talked about the number of different agencies and organizations that might participate in decision making, and we talked about the lack of leadership. And it just seems to me that maybe we could move to talking a little bit about, let's be clear about what the problems are, and then let's be clear about what some potential solutions might be. And I think there might be, look, I'm no expert. I've never been over there, really. But it seems like to me if we got creative about solutions in reference to the problems as we see them, that the solutions themselves might please the 6 or 7 organizations that are involved, including the need for a pipeline of income that the Khumbu is now used to and needs more of. And so I started to kind of leap forward to what could we do? What could actually change that everyone would actually be comfortable with? Like, what if we said, in order to go on Mount Everest, you had to do one other climb in Nepal before you went, which would add tourism revenue, add experience to the client base, put money in the pipeline, and increase the potential for safety and ease of access on the mountain itself. I mean, I just wonder if there are solutions in the midst of all this kind of philosophical conversation that people might be willing to get behind that would be good for all the parties involved. Conrad?
Having prerequisite that you climb other climbs before you go to Everest, I mean, I climbed in Nepal and India for years before I felt I was worthy enough to go to Everest. And when I was there in 2012, there was people that the boots were obviously wearing them, and they were so out of their element, and it created a risk for all the other people there. So it was problematic with that. Looking from the 40,000-foot view, being a citizen of the United States, being here where we are, Nepal is in a tough place. They're in a geopolitical vice between India to the south, China to the north. China provides manufactured goods, India provides the oil and the fuel. And the mediator that go between in that is the United States. Our government, our embassy has a very large presence within that to work with Nepal and probably of any foreign country. Dawa, you can either say yes or no to this. They have an ability to influence things. So if we could start by saying, Sagarmatha National Park, Denali National Park, they're going to be sister parks. We're going to share the best practices from both parks. We're going to encourage a dialogue using the climate management plan that we reviewed earlier in our conference here as a way to bring the disparate parties to the table to get them all to communicate. And having maybe the U.S. Embassy being an arbitrator on that, saying, we want to help this out. We realize that Everest is the flywheel that spins the tourist industry in Nepal, which it does. I mean, people come to trek because Everest is there. It's the icon. It's the NFL, the NBA, and the Hockey League all wrapped into one. And it's a huge thing for Nepal. I mean, if you're an Everest climber, you're celebrated. And it's very different than what we have here. But to get someone with an experience like the United States, the Denali National Park, to mentor them and to say, hey, if we don't address this early, which is one of the things that we talked about, if you don't address it early, then when it gets to the point where it's too late to address it, you're going to have a problem. But my question is, are we too late to address it?
Or who would actually implement that regulation?
The government of Nepal would. It would have to be set up.
Can I just say, we are in the process of trying to bring these parties together. We have a dialogue with the embassy, we have a dialogue with NMA, and have a dialogue with these national parks, and we're like in the process of bringing these parties together, hopefully within this next year, and maybe get a little infrastructure started. And it has to be a very delicate process, as Dawa Steven said, because the government of Nepal only opens the door a little crack. But with those big forces in the room, I think that there is the possibility of a little change happening, and as Dawa Steven says, it could happen overnight.
I love Phil's comment that what does success look like? And where have you seen success? And maybe I'll give Markus and Jonathan the chance to start on that one here. I mean, how would success look there, or how have we seen it in other locations where a peak like that just commands international attention and we make it? Because it seems, I have to admit, as a climber, I personally can't stand getting asked if I've climbed Everest. I'm tired of that question. You know, it's like, because I know on one level, Conrad's right. Like, there's people like, well, you climb Everest, whatever. But there is a certain amount of people who've never climbed anything, and it's like, well, did you climb Everest, right? Like, I'm sure you've all at some point in your career faced that question.
Pretty much everywhere from Denver to
it's like it's all it's about. I met
New York City. They're like, Everest is the only mountain.
Yeah, I met a little kid once. Just to talk about this, I was working in Washington D.C. and this little 5-year-old kid, he came in and his boss was he was the lead counsel for the National Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Just to digress for a second, so he manages all the legislation for all the parks and all the Forest Service areas in BLM. Like, powerful, great, tremendous human being, and he was trying to play me up to his son a little bit. It's like, oh, we got this guy from Mount Rainier working, he's climbing Mount McKinley, and the kid's like, but have you climbed Everest? In the moment, no, he walked away. He was like, whatever, dude. You're not worth much to me. So. Sorry, I just.
We're talking about some more pragmatic things. I think I'm going to say some things that might be rather controversial back home. I'm on camera, and I'll take that risk. One of the first controversial in the way that the system set up in Nepal. The first thing that we need to do is actually change the way, change who is allowed to organize an expedition, which is climbing on a mountain. Currently, there are over 1,600 trekking companies in Nepal, and a trekking company is allowed to organize an expedition. In other words, there are 1,600 companies some of whom just registered a few weeks ago, who is allowed to organize an expedition. So first of all, the government needs to say, trekking companies can only do this, organize treks,
And expedition companies are allowed to organize expeditions on mountains. And I think that will very quickly make people a little bit more accountable. It's going to become a little bit more transparent. There's only going to be, out of the 1,600, you may only have 300. So it's easier to monitor 300 companies, And then within, let's say that 300, I'm just using that number. It's not actually research number or anything. I'm just saying. So out of that 300, maybe there's a way to also certify them. Let's say we have the 5-star rating system of hotels in Nepal, so why can't we not do that with expedition companies? So, for example, everybody has a salary sheet, so everybody presents that to the government at the end of the year. Your audited accounts. So you show how many people are on your staff. If you have more than 100 that you employ, maybe you're a 5-star. I'm just saying, this could be one of the criteria. You could look at the total worth of the company. How much equipment does that company own? It could be a physical audit of how many tents do you actually own? How many pots and pans and stoves do you actually own? Etc. So there could be a system where you can actually certify companies. And so doing that, people will also be a little bit more careful about what they're doing up in the mountain. And also, the licensing system now, Jeevan, I don't know, we discussed this over some beers. It should not be that everybody should be allowed to organize expeditions. And here the certification system comes into play again. Let's say a company that has been in existence for 5 years, a trekking company who's been in existence for 5 years, may only after 5 years apply to become an expedition company, so that they have the skill set, they have the experience. And they must have organized at least five climbs on trekking peaks, as they're called, which are roughly 6,000 meter peaks. And after they've done that for 2 years, and they have had let's say they've taken 4 permits out of the government, then every time they could move up a tier until they become, let's say, a 5-star expedition company, and then only then are they allowed to organize an expedition on Mount Everest. And that way, people would be very, very careful about how they behave on the mountain, and also that would safeguard the reputation of Everest in a lot of ways. It's one of the ways you could do it, I think.
Would the NMA be taking the leadership in this?
Yeah, that was my question.
No, it would not be through the NMA. It would just be simply it would be a written rule in the Ministry of Tourism. And so it's not open to interpretation. It says, these are the criteria, bam, 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 bam. And if you fulfill this criteria over a 2-year period, you can then apply for higher certification, etc., until you become a 5-star.
Can I ask, what's the disruption? Because I think I would imagine that system, frankly, in its nuts and bolts, sounds like our concession management system, very much so. Same thing. Experience, social, financials, credibility. But how does that really implement? Because that sounds like a big change from a long way of doing business for 30 to 40 years in a place. And is there a model for that? Maybe, Markus, just to move off, so you and I have a conversation all night. It was great. But where are there other places where maybe this change has made a leap, and maybe someone from the audience has an answer, but where have they made that leap where they've kind of ramped it up?
I think it's an absolutely great idea. And I think that's what needs to happen in the long run. And I think it also ties into the idea of the certification body kind of implementing that as a kind of a non-governmentally initiative to start with, and then ideally it's kind of absorbed and put into the laws and rules of the country as such. I mean, that would be extremely good.
Can the NMA or the Guide Tourists and Concessions help get there?
One thing that we, just with the Juniper Fund, which is not a concession or
You
the
want to talk
NMA.
about that for a second?
Yeah, so the Juniper Fund is a nonprofit that I started with Dave Morton last year, to recognizing the need to provide a supplemental insurance benefit, essentially, to families after death or tragedy occurs, because the current insurance structure is inadequate in a lot of ways to provide financial support for families after an accident. And it's partly in a lot of different ways, the structure in which the payments come, the transparency of who they go to, and an actual number, the dollar number. So we're just looking to supplement that as not an insurance program, but as a donation to families, a death donation after an accident happens. And we really identified very early on that one of the best things that we could probably do with our time and resources was to try to encourage every agency to insure their staff to the maximum, which is expensive, right? It costs actual dollars to do that, but that's the easiest way to ensure that more money gets to a family after a death. But how do you encourage them to do that? And one of the ways that we have been talking about doing that is creating transparency and publishing the information that we can find, which is saying, this is the trekking agency, this is how many staff that they insured, and this is the dollar value they insured each of those staff to last year. It's just a fact, it's in paper, we can all access that information through the insurance companies and the ministry, and showing that, and so that it essentially becomes, here's companies that the Juniper Fund endorses. And that's sort of how, on a very, very tiny level, only looking at that one individual aspect of this big, huge moving piece, is to say, we're going to look at it for you, and we're going to say we support these companies because they support their staff to the fullest of their ability. And you're going to see that that's going to cost money, right? That's going to cost the customers more money to do that, but that's what operating ethically and responsibly is. It's going to cost a little bit more money down the line.
Just a question, I'm more directed. How do we make the clients aware of this? I mean, I think it's great to make it visible, but if they don't know it, I mean.
Yeah, and I think what Dawa was saying.
Their financial, because it's very clear in some of the stories, and just if
It's
you
just
have a chance, you're just outside it, some people stay for 5-7 years, and then they get their shot. So I guess your question's spot on, like how do you get someone to make that choice when it means serious?
But it's funny actually, because for the first time in my life I don't feel so cynical. No, but I actually think that, I mean, making that kind of numbers visible, I mean, that will drive some kind of change. It won't change everything.
But it's a component of what Dawa is saying, and it's saying, hey, we can't necessarily tomorrow get the Ministry of Tourism to give a 5-star rating to all of the different agencies and, restrict certain trekking agencies because they haven't been in existence from running operations. But we can start creating transparency in the things we have, and overnight there could be a 5-star system, and that's how you show clients. And I mean, just actually physically on the ground, it's what I started doing in 2012 and going around and talking with clients and saying, do you know what's happening with this agency that you hired? And that's just face to face, and that's not effective for mass communication to every potential customer of the Everest industry in a whole, but it's a little thing to start, and I really do believe it's like throwing your garbage on the ground.
So what are those elements of a responsible business that people can look to? What are those components? I mean, I think we answer the question for some of them, but what do you guys all think that they look like? Insurance, we talked about extensively, proper insurance and care. I'm just going to throw something out. Training, obviously, quality guiding.
Absolutely.
I mean,
it's fundamental and kind of, I don't know on that for a while, but.
I mean, that's, we have a poster there somewhere about organizational routines. And, I mean, studying an expedition and so on, and I'm not claiming I know everything about it, but from our research and so on. I mean, organizational routines are key to have a functioning organization. It's not just for expeditions, it's for diesel power plants, it's for IT projects and whatever. But people are carriers of routines. It's people that are conducting stuff. So I think key to having a change and what should be evaluated is experience and kind of knowledge. And then it's key to solution has to start with training. I mean, training both in kind of mountain skills, but it also comes down to language. It comes down to reading. It comes down to kind of not only including kind of people that's going to be working on the mountain, but it's going to include kind of women, it's going to include children and so on. It has to be broader than just the kind of
The social things.
Well, what actually killed all those people this spring was an avalanche that's going to keep happening. And apparently upwards above 100 people could have been killed if it arrived at a different timing. There was a broken ladder and there was congestion and all that. And then there's who decides where to put the ladder. There's choices. In the center, it's safer from the falling stuff, but there's all these big seracs and all that. And so I was talking with the chair of the SPCC, which is the icefall doctors, and he felt strongly that there should be, he doesn't want the icefall doctors to be responsible for deciding exclusively where that route should be, and then getting blamed for having misplaced it. And he thinks that there should be a shared decision amongst the leading guide services there, that they would come together and decide where the route should go, and then the icefall doctors would put it there. And so then the responsibility is shared, but it's shared amongst people who have a lot more expertise than they actually do.
Yeah.
And so things like that, I mean, that event is going to keep happening, and it may happen during the climbers window, or most of them are going to happen when the climbers aren't there, but it's just it's a luck of the draw. And so there needs to be systems like this for choosing the best route and for managing the traffic so that there isn't a cluster of people who are going to get hit all at once. It's only going to be 3 people who die or 10 people who die instead of 100. And that kind of group decision making needs to be facilitated. And the SPCC, if they're the ones who've been designated to be in charge of where this route is, well, then maybe they, now they're bringing in the others, to make it a group decision. That's an example of...
Are the commercial outfitters arriving to participate in that, though, early enough? I mean, are they...
Well, they'd have to, or they...
Yeah, I mean, that would seem just...
If I could actually.
Yeah, please.
With regard to the SPCC and the icefall doctors, I think a very important point needs to be noted, which is that a couple of years ago, the senior SPCC icefall doctor, Ang Nima, died. And he was a legend. He had been working in the icefall for 30 years. He knew the place inside out, and he could just look at a block of ice and say exactly when that thing would fall. And so since he's died, that wisdom, I suppose, is gone. And so the new guys are a little bit more wary. Yes, they are getting that experience, but they are also afraid, because just like they're saying, they don't want that responsibility if something were to happen. Now, actually, if we were going to go that direction of let's wait for everybody to come here and then we're going to decide like a committee which way the route should be, well, actually that's actually going to cause more problems. It doesn't necessarily mean that the route is going to be any safer. It just means that everybody's going to be allowed to have their little say in it, and then at the end of the day, it's going to go through the exact same place. They're going to make it anyways. But what's going to happen is the season's going to get later, and we're going to see pictures like we did in 2012, where we have 300, 400 people on one length of rope. When everybody is jam-packed into the final summit window. So one of the things that the expedition operators have been doing in the recent years is we've been trying to fix the rope to the summit as early as possible in May, when the first weather window hits, so that we have the whole month of May where people can go to the top according to their convenience, shall we say. Not because there's the pressure and the monsoon's about to come in a couple of weeks. They have the whole month so that we don't all have to go at the same time, And so coming back to the SPCC icefall doctor thing, I don't think that's a good idea. I think they need to have the capacity. If they don't have that, they should hire somebody who does have that.
Right. Well, but it could be a committee of people who come in earlier who fulfill that role. Whatever. That's one.
That would be climbing rangers.
Siobhan, please.
One question on that. This issue is, why don't we, all of the guide service, send their team leader 2 weeks ahead when their main group arrives? Because we start icefall work way earlier than the group arriving in this camp. So team leader, SPCC doctor, when they can discuss about which is the safest way to put the ladder, maybe that's gonna be good for coming season. Otherwise,
Let me, and also I want to be cautious that we really are diving into the weeds here a little bit, which is,
But Phil, what a practical solution.
I love it. No, I love the weeds. I live in the weeds. I love the weeds. But are the clients even remotely attached to understanding this at all, though, since they're paying for this all?
It depends on the client. Some of them they're climbers. I mean, there's guys that, I use that in male and female, that have saved up their whole life. This is their goal, and they're there to climb. There's the trophy hunters that just want it. They want to get it done. They want to get it done quickly. But the fixing of the rope through the icefall, fixing of the low face, fixing to the summit. This work, from my own perspective, best be handled in the way we do it on Denali, where the rangers are doing it. So if there was a dedicated crew of 8 to 10 very experienced Sherpas that are well paid,
That
maybe
live there.
3 or 4 Westerners that work with them, because we have to get that communication between the 2 groups, because that's the dynamic that's going there. And then this team would work with the Everest Base Camp doctors and the medical crew that Luann Freer has running there, and then get the route up to the icefall, get it up onto the Losa Face and onto the summit, and doing it early, because as it stands now, it's sort of, everyone comes in there, all the rope is put in this big pile, and then every expedition is asked to put resources into fixing rope.
That's
And-
changed now, though, Conrad.
Okay.
That has changed.
So now is it paid, or
Yeah,
how's that?
so the government of Nepal has given us the mandate, that's us as in the Expedition Operators Association, to collect a certain fee from each individual, each named person on a permit. And from that money, we buy equipment that is used. So we have only one color of rope all the way to the top. We buy enough that there's double ropes on certain difficult sections, for example. We make sure that we only get black diamond ice screws, for example. So we have improved those standards.
But the labor,
Well,
labor is still donated by the expeditions.
it is.
And my expedition took a higher hit because we had more experience and we were not a commercial, we were a media trip.
Yeah.
And so we ended up expending more of my staff's effort fixing rope on both the Losa Face and the summit, because we weren't, the commercial operators, like, I don't want to exhaust my best guys on that. Where I was, with my team, I had climbers that could do it on their own, and our team worked on that.
It would just seem it would seem that the best, or sort of maybe more like frankly a media organization, they can't accept failure. It's going to be harder for them, so they're going to be more invested in making sure it happens, and then they're drafting off of that experience and that opportunity.
It wasn't about that. I couldn't, if Nat Geo didn't get what they wanted out of that trip, I couldn't give a shit.
Yeah.
I was there to protect the safety of the team that I was working with, because these guys I have personal connections with. And that, if we can get the fixing of the rope and that mechanical stuff financed out of the $3.5 million that the ministry collects, if they were to say, we're gonna put $250,000 and we're gonna have this team, and they're gonna have uniforms, they're gonna have modern technology to monitor the people, and have the power of the government to be there, it would be much better. Because you imagine if you were on Denali and the ropes that go up to
Mountain Trip had theirs.
yeah, and someone else said, okay, it's your turn to go fix them this year. And it's done by the Park Service, and they realize that, and there's slightly different. And I think until we get to that point where there's a government-supported and government-regulated rescue team that is in charge of fixing the ropes, we're going to have this same sort of like everyone pays for the rope, but who's putting the labor into putting them in?
Just to talk a bit briefly about that, both on Rainier and Denali, there was a lot of apprehension, I should be honest, in the federal government about our responsibility in placing fixed ropes. And I'll be honest, there was just different discussions. And frankly, it does work very well in Denali, but there was a lot of apprehension on Rainier to model Denali's fixing of lines. And frankly, Denali does a great job with it. It makes sense. It works better that way. But on Rainier, the guide services who have the most interest in it make it so. And we don't touch it. So it's interesting, just as a different model.
And having this conversation with the outfitters, they're like, well, if we have a rescue team up there, people are going to be hucking themselves at the summit without, and they know that they've got this rescue margin, and they do it anyways, but having officials on the mountain that would coordinate rescues, that would communicate with the helicopters, because right now there isn't one central triage point where something happens with that.
And it's starting to change, and I do think there's we have to consider this. I think this idea of having a set fixing ranger-esque role is really a great idea and would be vital to having that run very smoothly. The problem right now is that we take all of the best, strongest, fittest local workers, in large part, to fix the ropes to the summit, beyond what the icefall doctors do, from each team. So you were on a team with a number of some of these strongest, most capable, and the reason that is because often those local workers are responsible to also guide clients, again, so they're gonna have to summit twice. They can't just be strong enough to climb once. So if we posse up who these people are, we don't wanna take these experienced guides away from the commercial expeditions that still need guides, and the training it's evolving, it's happening right now, and it has to be kind of in tandem, right, so that we don't sort of scoop up everything. And then I think the big, huge thing to remember here, it's so unbelievably easy to get really stuck in how the ropes get fixed, and that there's this really amazing idea of, you know, should there be a different responsibility beyond the icefall doctors not being the only ones responsible for it. If you've ever seen the icefall, show me a safe route through the icefall. Because it's extraordinarily dangerous no matter where you go, and we're balancing two dangers, right? We're balancing, oh, I want to go this way because it's faster, and we have this huge overhead danger, which totally manifested this year. Or we're going to go this way, which is going to take 2.5 hours more for the workers and 7.5 hours more for the clientele, and then they're exposing themselves to this risk for longer. And all you can do is point to an accident when it happens and say, well, that was a failure point. The failure point is that this section of the mountain, among others, is just objectively hazardous. And we have to accept that and find the best ways to work within it with the resources we have. And I think that has to do with creating this ranger team that would essentially be responsible for those ropes, but could bear that responsibility in the environment that we know. It's a super dangerous area. Bad things can happen, it's not anyone's fault.
I'm gonna go take a risk with this question, just popped in my head. And this is gonna be a naive question, I admit, because I haven't been there. Do the Sherpa in that region really see the stewardship of the land as theirs? Do they see it as their responsibility? No, I mean,
I'll say straight away.
I love that. No, that's what I wanted to hear, actually. And I just asked that question. It just popped into my head because it seems as though there's so much about really the success of dealing with clients that are paying a lot of money, and I'm just hearing this discussion. Again, I'm not here as I feel innocent. If I'm naive in my comments, forgive me, but it does strike me that maybe there's just not this, there is this bigger body that's looking more at and it sounds like this icefall doctor who passed away, it sounds like an amazing man who had a lot of experience, and it's unfortunate his mentorship being passed along, but how do we step that up so that that's owned by someone who's really has pride in it, and not the summit, I mean like that thing, like we have at Yosemite, people have pride in the way they build buildings, right? The way that they do an evening program really matters to them. They know that you love Yosemite, they know you can like Yosemite Falls, but they care that night you're going to about John Muir and about, Miracles Butterflies and whatnot. So
The example of the North Slope of Alaska, we was in one of today's conversations about that the oil is extracted, it's piped down, but the profits end up in Dallas.
Yeah.
And the effects to the Inuit communities are up there. And I think that underlying tension showed its head in 2013 with the argument, and then again this year. And so until that model is...
How does that benefit come back to there?
Yeah. And so they're in...
Because it's all, frankly, again, I'm not there, so it's on Sherpa's backs. The whole thing has been done this way. I'm sorry. I wish I could say I've climbed Everest on my own, but I can't. It just seems as though it really is.
Well, there is increasing responsibility by the Sherpas. There's more and more of these, and Sherpa need to use that generically. They're not the only ones.
Sure,
they're just the famous ethnic group, and their job is named after them.
Fair enough.
So for convenience, we'll say the Sherpas are leading more and more of the expeditions, which isn't always a good thing depending on whether they have the insurance or whether they're just undercutting the price, that sort of thing. But that sounds like the way Dawa described it would be very much improved. But there is much more of a sense, again, the SPCC, it just seems like a marvelous organization, and the chair was telling me about the garbage, hauling out the garbage now. There's been lots of cleanup expeditions back to Brent Bishop and Dawa's and a more recent one, and so lots of stuff has been taken out in these giant expedition cleanups, but now the new policy is that you have to take out 8 kilos of trash with you from the mountain. And so there's a little bit controversy whether that's the right amount and how they're going to deal with it and all that, but the point is that they're going to be taking out more, and he, whether he's right or not, he thinks that within 5 years all the garbage from the mountain will be gone. But this is a local effort. This wasn't something that we thought up and brought to them. They thought it up themselves, and they're wanting to make the mountain clean. They care about it. And so whether it's a new ethic or an old ethic, whatever, but it's happening. And there's so much of this that's just happening grassroots there.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to question the stewardship and the love of Mount Everest. I just wondered that, but that different level of visitor services and client management that's so intense and very different than respecting a mountain. It's just a different animal, but you may love the mountain, but obviously caring for those clients is a different animal and may conflict with it. Let's take a couple questions, actually.
I guess a comment that I'd be curious on some feedback from. It ties into what's been talked about here. And in the national parks, there's a bid to one concessionaire. And that concessionaire wins the services to the park for a period of time, correct?
It varies on parks, but yes, there can be concessions that get one bid. But like on Mount McKinley, I think there's, John, is there 6 or 5? 6, yeah, there's 6 climbing guide services. Mount Rainier, there's 3. And then, but like at Yosemite, the biggest contract in the entire National Park Service is it's the hotel operator and the food service, and it's 1, and it's lucrative.
Okay. But at the same time, there's a lot of control. Because the park stipulates specifications.
Tremendous control.
You know, and it seems like what's necessary to have that stage developed is a fair bit of vision. And it seems like it keeps coming back to the fact that there is seemingly no body that's disseminating a vision, or at least tying together other people's, or every group of people, to sure that everybody's objectives and bringing them to a vision. So we have all these little issues down here, and it seems like the big question to get to those.
It's the Everest Knot.
What's the vision? Who delivers the vision, and how does that go?
I think that's the challenge that Jenny was trying to say to me before this talk tonight, is that that's maybe our job, or maybe something that we can participate in, not our job, but that we want to participate in, facilitate. I don't know, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, infrastructure's needed, and the NMA is a start, and they, as Dawa Steven said, you know, they've been trying, and you know, they get a lot of flack. They get fingers pointed at them because they're an entity that's there, and everybody's like, well, what are they doing, you know? But the challenges are massive, because I mean, if you can look at our own national parks, and we can see from this conference, you know, the challenges that we all face with our own national parks and other countries in the world, you know, the infrastructure, you know, that's way more advanced and complex than what Nepal has. And yeah, you just keep trying, and I think that we're all kind of at the table and ready to try. And it takes maybe a tragedy like the one that just happened for some people to kind of take notice. And that's what we're hoping. And we're hoping that, you know, if we get the right players in the room, there can be some consensus about, yeah, some infrastructure's needed here. What can we do?
So,
Next, yeah.
Okay. I guess, you know, just like fire is a tool, money is a tool, right? Fire can be used to cook food, it can be used to burn your house down, so it depends on how you use it and how you make good use of it, more importantly. So I guess more so, and I'm not necessarily seeking answers to this question. If there was an answer, we probably would be in a room talking about it. But how do you see good utilization of money? You know, with the Juniper Fund making I guess the salary sheets available to everybody, transparency, and not to make light of it, but it's almost like a Yelp service, which lets people know of how these different communities are treating the Sherpas and all the services that they're using. So is there a good way to make sure that, you know, if we are throwing money down the way, and that's really the best way to influence change, monetary incentives, how do we make sure it's being utilized well? You know, again, like I said, I don't think it's
Marcus.
Thank you. Oh man, that was a tough one. Exactly, I shouldn't have said I was in business administration.
Well, actually, maybe we'll give you a brief Dawa. What do you? I mean, well, no, just like seriously, if the money's going to land in ideally there, some of it has to go. So, how is it most responsible to demonstrate there?
Well, there's two ways really. One, you got to know the organization you're giving the money to, and if you know that organization, you trust them, you give them that money. That's easy. The other option, like for example, what happened after the 18th April incident, the government of Nepal requested Nepal Mountaineering Association to set up a fund and have all the different associations, not just the Mountaineering Association, but also the various different tourism-related organizations and others as well, to sit on a board, all the presidents sit on that board, and that's where all the money that's collected worldwide has been requested to be sent, so that we all know how much money was collected and how much money is coming into the country. And even if that money is going directly to the family, that committee has been tasked with finding out who has sent what money and how much, right? And who's it gone to? Just so that we know what's happening. And the other thing as well, with particular focus on this committee, is that it's not just 16 people that died this year. There will be more deaths in the future. And that's for sure. It's a reality. And so it's this year, 16 people died. And so there was a huge reaction from the world. But next year, maybe only 2 will die. At that point, not many people will be raising money. And not that much money is going to be coming into the country. And so the money that's been collected this year also should actually be a seed fund for future accidents. That's something that we're doing right now.
But then again, I mean, I think that's great. But then we are talking about the accidents, and I mean, that's by definition retrospective. I mean, that's stuff that already happened. And I mean, of course, there needs to be support for, I mean, families that have lost someone and they don't get, I mean, basically they are put at severe risk, the entire family. But I think still a kind of a certification body or something like that with completely transparent numbers. I mean, kind of not just putting the numbers out there that this is the money we get in, this is the money we can get out of it, and as part of it we're going to have kind of the certification process. That's going to cost money. But in order for the kind of local expedition organizers to actually go with the certification, I don't think it should add costs to them. I mean, they shouldn't have to pay in order to be certified, because then there's going to be an apprehension against it. Because, I mean, it costs us money, we have to raise the fees and so on, and it's going to impact the clients, yada, yada, yada. So it's, I think a good use of money would actually be to provide it to this kind of international body or kind of independent body, and use it kind of proactively instead of only reactively. Reactively has to be a part of it, but focus on the proactive stuff.
We're approaching almost 2 hours, actually. If there's another quick question out there, I'm happy, Roger.
Yeah, it's not so much a question, but you know, after kind of watching what everybody said tonight and kind of comparing it to Denali, and I look back at my earlier years in Denali, and I can see a direct parallel to what happened and what's going on right now to the mid-'70s, especially 1976 on Denali. And if anybody wants to do any research on that, they'll see that it's very similar. And even though there are differences, there's more similarities than differences. And what happened that year, we had a lot of people die, lots and lots of rescues. There were no park rangers. That was the year that started the idea to have some park rangers that maybe could help with education, could help with, and the thing about the fixed ropes is we work together with the guides. It's a shared responsibility, not just the guides and the park rangers work together to put those ropes up now. But that 1976 was a banner year, and it changed the direction of where we are today. We had, like Dawa's been doing and others, I was on cleanup climbs in Denali prior to that. We had lots of people after that. Park Service really wasn't involved in any of that, and their emphasis was different. I think this is, unfortunately, this accident maybe will bring some good things down the road. But what we did need to do is it took advocacy from the public to make those changes happen. Park Service knew they needed to do something, but there was a lot of input from the American Alpine Club and guide companies, others, very, very concerned climbers, including Brad Washburn and others, that gave input to the park. And so that's why I see it happening around the world and at this conference. And I can see this as a parallel to 1976. And we are on a very good footing today. It doesn't mean we might not have problems with our park and mountaineering, but we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot in those practically 40 years.
Well, that's actually nice. Thank you, Roger. That's actually great. Almost makes it easy to kind of close it a little bit. I guess I just wanted one quick closing question for everyone. We talked, obviously, we've been focused on Everest, but I guess long-range story, and again, it's back to this idea that we need to take a leadership role as climbers, and that's what we do. What practices have worked, and if you had one to choose, or one model, what might that be for Everest? I guess maybe we've heard them all, but if there's any closing thoughts you have about how we might move forward, particularly, and if it's a call to action for other parties, I mean, it's time not to just have a conversation, but to do it. I'll just share on behalf of Yosemite, we are entering into a sister park relationship with Sagamorta. We're very interested in that relationship. We have had the director of the Paul's National Park Service, the soil, and actually, help me out a second, because you had it correct, Conrad, it's soil and conservation?
Ministry of Soil and Conservation
and Wildlife.
Yes, and wildlife, yes. So, and forgive me for not having a title correctly.
Forestry is another one.
And the forestry is another one. They have a Department of Ag. It's like our Department of Ag and our Department of Interior. Well, anyway, they were in Yosemite, and I have to admit, I was pushing them towards Denali. I swear to God, I wasn't Mount Rainier too, because I love Mount Rainier. But they love the management of Yosemite. They just saw Yosemite as an icon. And so we wanted to participate in this relationship, not because, just because of what Everest and names like Yosemite mean and how they have value, and their Meg Penday saw that. We also hit them up that we wanted to partner with other parks, Longtong and Chitwan, because we thought that there were other issues that were really relevant to a lot of our staff in Yosemite, everything from road development to wildlife management issues that we deal with well. So we intend to participate in that and challenge, actually, by Janie. She pulled me aside. She's like, you got to get over there and get on it, Mike. So we have our challenge. I assume we want to help, but what can we do from commercial businesses to federal agencies or academics or just independents? What might you see in the next couple of years to make this happen? Conrad, do you mind taking the first time?
A climbing management plan, establishing what the carrying capacity of the mountain is, a professional rescue team that's financed by the peak fees of the climbers that are there, that is an elite team that the people that locally will look up to and aspire to be part of. And then a way to qualify the clients. And ideally, they do 2 trips to Nepal before they go to Everest. They don't need to do an 8,000 meter peak, but they're familiar with Nepal, they're familiar with the culture, they're used to the food, they know that how Nepali people communicate, and that by your second trip, and if you're on your 3rd trip to Nepal, you'll understand certain nuances and certain ways that you communicate, and that would make it for a better experience for both the guest, and they would hopefully in turn be more respectful of the local people.
Melissa, what do you see?
Transparency. I think it's a continuous theme that I've stuck to. I think the more that we can disclose what's actually currently happening, the easier it's going to be to resolve the little holes that are occurring, and the more honest we are, the more it's easy to identify best practices, because it's great when everybody has to put their cards on the table. You really are held to your word a little bit more.
Marcus, any quick thoughts?
I was actually thinking about what is it in English? The Gordian knot?
Yes.
Yeah. So the simplest alternative would actually be to just chop off the rope, I guess. No.
Alexander, right?
No, but I think, I mean, you summarize it beautifully. I believe also in kind of transparency and kind of the elite team and all that kind of stuff. Also, but I mean, I'm a stubborn man. I've been told I'm quite stubborn as well. That there needs to be this kind of independent international body that are kind of can be transparent, exactly, and also can take initiatives that are independent from governments. The government going to come along as soon as they see the benefit of it, but someone has to take the first step. And I think that's up to us as a community, or you as a community. I'm a researcher. But then just a tiny little initiative that could be done kind of really easily is to have this kind of initiative, this kind of conference next time in Nepal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so easy. I mean, I've traveled around half the world to get here. You can actually travel to Nepal to have this kind of thing as well. And then it's much easier to address the different parties that must be involved in this kind of solution. It's quite simple. It's very difficult, but
John,
that's
John, I don't know if John was also the editor of their AAJ for many years in climbing. He worked for Climbing Backpacker magazine. How can the media, from your perspective, this story? I know it's not your live every day, but it does seem as though they are a player in this. We haven't really touched into this.
Okay, well,
And I want
first I'll
thoughts
follow
on
on that theme. I mean, definitely, well, echo all of these, but especially Conrad's climbing management plan idea, which, from what I've just learned here in these, starting this morning really, it sounds like it's exactly what's needed there. And if the players would come together to make this happen, you know, it can't be a government bureaucrat dictated thing. It has to be something that involves all the players coming together to make it happen. And that's exactly what's needed. But from my perspective of being up there and talking with so many people, I really do still feel that there's not enough communication. There needs to be, this ties in also to this notion of having this conference over there. Well, I think that this Sagamartha Tourism Commission conference that happens in Namche every year is basically a version of this. It's already happening. But I went through 28 days of talking to people, and nobody mentioned that to me until like the last day before we had a workshop in Kathmandu with people who were there. I finally discovered it. And so there's this forum where people are communicating once a year, but it needs to be ongoing. It needs to continue the communication throughout, so that cooperation. I think that. So basically, it is amplifying that the forum be like this forum. Now this is going to happen this one time, and then whoever happens to keep up in touch with each other will. But something where it was ongoing, so the people who came together talked about it once, and then there was an active process of keeping the conversation going would be really good. Which sort of relates to media. This media's job is to communicate and share the stories. So it depends on whether you mean the local media in Nepal or the international media. But their
Can they
job,
stop talking about Yosemite and Everest for 1 year? Can we just try?
well, that would be great.
I mean,
now
just
we're
like
talking about
1 year,
Everest.
take a break, like.
But that would fit into Melissa's transparency thing too. Is in theory, what the media does is expose, bring everything to light. And so if the media were actively informed about what's going on there, and that again would be something that more communication, like through a website where you could keep track of all the different players and know what's going on in this region, then there'd be information there that people would pick up on, and they'd hear these good stories too.
The New York Times articles created a sense of outrage amongst my friends who didn't understand climbing at all, actually, looking at this incident. They were very upset, but they perceived to be some very social injustice. Right? So, just as a side note,
Right, well, because it was Sherpas who were killed. And,
it was just a sense of not understanding full issues of conflict together. But
right.
Wow, you get that. Well, I think I already mentioned a couple of things that could be done. I don't want to go back over that. I think the word vision was used earlier, and one thing that hasn't come through today is what is the vision of the Nepalis? What does the mountain mean to them? Not what the mountain means to you guys here. It's more important what the mountain means to us in Nepal, you know? And so that also needs to be addressed. And I think a good way to go ahead would, forget workshops, don't come to Nepal, don't do a workshop, because it's not gonna do anything, in my humble opinion. A better forum would be at the UIAA General Assembly, which is coming up, I believe, in October. You should have a workshop where you ask the Nepal Mountaineering Association to bring their vision forward. You, as the American Alpine Club or the New Zealand Alpine Club or whoever, you get there, you share your ideas, come up with some sort of a model that you think that has to be implemented for Nepal, and then put that forward to the government of Nepal, and the government of Nepal will have to listen to you. And as an example of that, recently the European Commission blacklisted the Nepal Civil Aviation because it wasn't following the international civil aviation rules, or wasn't effectively implementing the rules of the civil aviation. And so once that happened, the entire civil aviation industry scrambled and are currently trying to bring up their standards so that they don't get blacklisted anymore. Maybe something similar, a threat of some sort like that could be also given to the Ministry of Tourism to say, our citizens are going to your country and dying on your mountain because you are not meeting the standards. Meet those standards, otherwise we are actually going to make, well, a shitstorm.
All right, unless there's any last questions, and because everybody seems engaged, so if there's any questions, otherwise we can go ahead and conclude and have basic one-on-one conversations. Any more? Well, great. I guess thank you, everyone. Thank you, definitely. I know it's a weedy topic, but.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, panelists. And the conference resumes tomorrow morning here at 8:30 in the morning. We'll see you then.
That's allowed in this